Channel, we've been exploring unusual disappearances from all over the world for just over a year now, and in that time we've covered many countries from almost every continent. Now unfortunately, because of the time of year, I don't have enough time to produce new research, and this video is going to be a compilation of some of the strangest cases that we've covered. We'll get back to normal after the new year, and I'll carry on researching disappearances alongside other topics too. So do let me know if there's anything specific that you'd like to see feature on the channel next year. Anyway, with that being said, thank you very much for your support over the past year, and I wish you a Merry Christmas. Do be safe over the festive period. William Jones, a miner from Meardy, located at the head of the Rhondda Valley in Wales, had planned a trip to take his 5-year-old son, Tommy Jones, to see his grandparents who lived on a farm near the town known as Brecon. On the 4th of August, 1900, which was a Saturday before a bank holiday, Tommy and his father set off. They travelled by train and arrived at the town at 6 p.m. that evening. From there, they had to walk roughly 4 miles to reach the farmhouse, which was located deep in the valley and north of the Beacon Mountains. After walking for 2 hours, and at 8 p.m. that night, they reached the login, which is now in ruins. This is a place where soldiers were encamped for training at the rifle range further up the valley. The exact temperature that day is unclear, but it was reported as being very warm, and as a result of this, despite only having a quarter of a mile left to travel, William stopped for refreshments and bought Tommy some biscuits at the canteen. By chance, Tommy's grandfather and cousin, Willie John, 13 at the time, also arrived at the canteen. Willie was asked to go back to the farm and tell his grandmother to expect Tommy and William. Willie did so and began to run back towards the farmhouse. Tommy wanted to go too and ran off with him up the valley. It was beginning to get dark at this point, and the boys had to cross 2 rough plank bridges. One of them was without a handrail. It was thought that at this point, with the light fading away, that Tommy got frightened. The boys were halfway to the farmhouse, and because of his fright, Tommy began to cry and decided to head back to his father at the login. Willie, on the other hand, made it to the farmhouse and then returned to the login within a quarter of an hour, only to find that Tommy wasn't there. Willie, the grandfather, and William immediately began searching the area for him. Around 20 minutes after the initial search, they were joined by the soldiers from the camp. Midnight came around and the search was halted, presumably to ensure that no one else got hurt or lost. At 3 a.m, the search started again, only this time the searchers' numbers soared as the police and the general public got involved. Despite having many people out looking for Tommy, he wasn't found that day and there was no sign of him at all. The search continued for weeks afterwards, with many people searching tirelessly for the boy. Every single day, the search parties were formed of police, soldiers, farmers, and other civilians who combed the entire area systematically but still could not locate a single trace of Tommy. Authorities began to suspect that Tommy must have fallen off one of the footbridges and into the stream below, or alternatively had wandered straight on down the valley instead of making the correct turn and going across the second bridge. Taking this into consideration, the search concentrated in the wooded country around the login and down the valley as far away as Brecon Waterworks, but despite this, they could still find no trace of Tommy. At this point, the police began to suspect that Tommy might have been kidnapped, which was also thought was the last hope that Tommy might still be found alive. Many gypsies had settled in campsites around the Breconshire area along with neighbouring counties, and the police had ransacked many of them, but this was unsuccessful. News of this incident spread like wildfire, the press picked it up and was soon being reported across the country. The Daily Mail took an interest in the matter and offered a £20 reward, which is the purchasing power of £2,336 in 2019, to anyone who could solve this case. The Daily Mail sent a special commissioner to Brecon, whose influence made the gypsy kidnapping theory lose ground, and instead thought it more likely that Tommy had been abducted by a childless woman or a couple, or alternatively had been murdered, though also said that he did not believe that this was the case. After several weeks of searching, William's family pleaded with him to return home to Meardy, and he did so, but soon came back as he was unable to cope with the fact that his boy might still be out there in the wilderness. After William's return, he was one of several people who climbed to the top of the beacons in their desperate search. At this point, BreckensBeacons.org reported, a Mrs. Hamer, a gardener's wife at Castle Maddock, some miles north of Brecon, having read accounts of the search, is said to have dreamed of the very spot where Tommy was to be found. She spent a couple of restless days before finally persuading her husband to borrow a pony and trap on Sunday the 2nd of September to take her and some relatives to the beacons, which they had never climbed before. Mrs. Hamer's husband was not convinced that they would find anything and went through with it to put her mind at peace. However, later that day, they reached the top of a ridge and made their way towards the peaks across some open ground where the husband, who was first in line, found the body of Tommy Jones. The death was reported to be as a result of exposure and exhaustion. However, one problem remained. No one could explain how this small, 5-year-old boy, tired and hungry, managed to reach the location his body was found. According to BreckensBeacons.org, the location was 686 metres above sea level, a climb of 400 metres from the login, at least 2 miles over difficult ground and probably in the dark. During the search, it had not been considered worthwhile to make a thorough search of high ground, as authorities thought that it was an impossibility that a 5-year-old boy could have made it up a mountain. Not only that, but children who go missing typically walk downhill. Interestingly, it was also mentioned that when Tommy's father William climbed up the mountain himself, he must have been within a dozen yards of the body but didn't see it. Does this indicate that the body was not there when the father searched? The question must also be asked, how in the world did Tommy manage to get up there? Does this indicate that he was not alone and someone took him up there? It's unclear, and the circumstances of his disappearance remain a mystery today over 100 years later. The location where Tommy's body was found is marked by an obelisk out of respect for this incredibly sad passing. Generally speaking, lighthouses are known for being extremely secluded places which dictate a solitary lifestyle which is not for everyone. Obviously, this is not the safest work environment, as emergency services are often not able to respond quickly to any accidents that may occur. So when 3 experienced men working the lighthouse on the Flannan Isles disappeared without a trace, questions began to arise. This incident occurred at the dawn of the 20th century and quickly became one of the most disturbing mysteries of the time. The lighthouse in question was built in 1899 and was on the isle known as Eilean Mor. The lighthouse itself was 75 feet tall and served as an important link for guiding transatlantic ships towards the harbour in Leith, Scotland. The lighthouse housed 3 workers, 2 regular and 1 occasional, who rotated from the mainland. Apart from the 3 men, the rest of the island was uninhabited except for a herd of sheep. Herders from the mainland referred to the island as the other country and believed that the island had been touched by something paranormal. Something I found interesting about this place was that the island of Eilean Mor was home to a very old chapel built in the 7th century by Saint Flannan. It's said that the island itself elicited a fearful reverence in its visitors. It's also thought that even those who did not pray were moved to while on the island. The island was home to many superstitions and rituals, such as circling around the church on your knees, which was adopted by many visiting. On the 7th of December 1900, Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall and James Ducat arrived at the Flannan Isles Lighthouse to begin their 2-week rotation as keepers of the lighthouse. This lighthouse was regularly monitored from the mainland by way of telescope. This was to ensure that in case of an emergency, the men could signal for help. Unfortunately, thick mist hit the area and the lighthouse could only be seen clearly on December the 7th and December the 12th from the mainland. On the 15th of December 1900, however, something highly unusual seemed to have taken place on that remote, lonely island. All 3 men had seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth, and not a single shred of evidence has ever been found as to what may have happened. The steamer Arctur, which had travelled from Philadelphia, passed by the Flannan Isle lighthouse and noted that its light was not operational. On the 18th of December, the Arctur docked in Leith and the lighthouse irregularity was reported. Because of bad weather conditions, the relief boat, Hesperus, which was stationed nearby on the island of Lewis, had to postpone its investigation until December the 26th, where it was found that the lighthouse had been unmanned for days. Jim Harvey was captain of the Hesperus and upon arrival stated that the men were nowhere to be found. Procedure dictates that the men should have waited for the Hesperus to dock, but they never appeared. However, what the crew did find was nothing short of perplexing. Joseph Moore was the replacement keeper and was first to investigate. Interestingly, upon setting foot on the island, Joseph reported feeling an all-encompassing sense of dread. Once Joseph had ascended the cliff and entered the lighthouse, he found that the kitchen table contained plates of meat, potatoes, and pickles. He said that the clocks had stopped and there was an overturned chair nearby. In addition to this, he found that the beds were all unmade. He went on and described that the lamp was ready for lighting and 2 of the 3 oilskin coats belonging to the 3 men were gone. Finally, he noted that the gate and door were firmly shut. These findings raised a lot of questions, especially because they indicate that the 3 men had broken protocol. The rules forbade all 3 men from leaving together as someone needed to be inside the lighthouse to man it at all times. So why did they all leave at the same time, and why did one of the men leave their coat behind? Were they drawn or enticed outside? Also, given that the beds were unmade, does that suggest that something could have taken place during the night? Though that does not explain the food left on the table, as they surely would have cleared that up before turning in for the night. Joseph returned to the Hesperus with his report and informed the captain that something terrible had occurred on that island. Captain Jim Harvey then sent this telegram back to the mainland. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannels. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but as no response was made, managed to land more, who went up to the station but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. I have left Moore, MacDonald, Boymaster, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements. Will not return to Auburn until I hear from you. I have repeated this wire to Moorhead in case you are not at home. I will remain at the telegraph office tonight until it closes if you wish to wire me. A further investigation was spearheaded on December the 29th by Superintendent Robert Moorhead. Robert concluded that the oilskins left behind were intended for Donald MacArthur, otherwise known as the Occasional. Robert analysed the keeper's log and found that the final entry was made on December the 15th, where he found that the western landing had been damaged prior to their disappearance. Robert reconstructed the events and suggested that Thomas and James went to repair the landing site around dinner time of the 15th, while Donald remained to man the lighthouse, as per protocol. Robert stated that it was at this point that something made Donald leave the lighthouse unmanned and left his oilskin coat. It was at this time that the 3 men went missing. Other than this, further investigations never led anywhere. There are some of the very interesting things mentioned in the logbook that seem to depict the men acting strangely before their disappearance, which I've also documented in many cases prior to the disappearance. On December the 12th, an entry from Thomas read, "Severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He went on to state that James had been quiet and Donald had been crying, which is very unusual for men with the reputation of being tough and experienced seafarers. The following day, an entry by Thomas explained that all of the men had been praying together, which seems to be odd behaviour from well-seasoned keepers in a brand new, safe lighthouse. If this isn't strange enough, let's get really bizarre. These entries confused investigators because there were no storms reported in the area on December the 12th, 13th or 14th, the weather should have been calm up until the 17th. Except this didn't seem to be what the men were experiencing, and were all obviously terrified by something. The last entry was made on the 15th and read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall and James Ducat have never been found, and it's unclear exactly what took place on that lonely, remote island. Sigmund Adamski was born in August of 1923 and spent 34 years living in his native Poland, where he married in 1957. In 1960, Sigmund and his wife, Lottie, moved to Tingley, which is a small town located near Wakefield in Yorkshire, England. According to the locals, Sigmund and Lottie were hard-working people. They were friendly and unassuming, and by all accounts got along with most people. Well, at 3:30 p.m. on June the 6th, 1980, Sigmund went grocery shopping and walked to the local shops. On the way to the shops, Sigmund was seen by one of his neighbours, which would be the last time he was ever seen again. Sigmund's disappearance was bizarre, and by all accounts he was a family-oriented man, and for him to go missing without notice for days was completely out of character. Especially since his goddaughter's wedding was taking place the following day, which Sigmund was looking forward to. 5 days later, on June the 11th, Sigmund's body was discovered by Trevor Parker, who is the son of the owner of Tomlin's Coal Yard. Sigmund's body was found at 3:45 p.m. that day, which was around 5 hours after the yard had last been used. Strangely, Trevor was at the site from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. that day and said that he didn't see anything unusual. At 4 p.m, PC Alan Godfrey arrived and examined the body and said that he believed that Sigmund had passed away as a result of a heart attack. Everyone involved realised just how bizarre this finding was and questioned how this could be a straightforward heart attack. Sigmund's body was face down at the top of a 12-foot high pile of anthracite. It was suggested that the body was most likely placed there from above, as no evidence existed to suggest that anyone had climbed up or down the heap. Another interesting question is, how could he have been lowered from above without being seen in the middle of a hot summer's day? If things weren't already bizarre enough, it's about to get stranger. When found, there were no signs that Sigmund had been sleeping rough on the streets and did not appear to be suffering from any medical conditions. It was detailed that he hadn't checked into a hospital during the time he spent missing, and not only that, but it was found that he had also eaten well during the time he spent missing. It's also important to note that there were no signs of a struggle at all. And even stranger still was the fact that Sigmund's shirt was missing. His pants and shoes were fastened scruffily, as if it had been done by someone who didn't know how to do it. Also noted was the fact that his coat was fastened up the wrong way. And despite being missing for 5 days, there was only a single day's worth of beard growth. But most strange of all was the burn marks around his neck and shoulders, which were also covered in a gel-like substance that couldn't be identified. Dr. Alan Edwards performed the autopsy and concluded that Sigmund passed away between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. on the day that he was found, while the burns were 2 days old. Dr. Edwards was so confused about this case that it took him several months to come to the conclusion that it must have been as a result of a heart attack. This is just an unbelievable case that's very hard to explain. What do you think happened here? I'd love to hear your thoughts in regards to all of these cases. On April the 29th, 1981, 84-year-old Dr. Maurice Thomas went topaz hunting with his friend David McSweeney. Interestingly, Darmot's had a PhD in theology and had many publications to his name. He went on to become a pastor of a Presbyterian church in Littleton, Colorado, and head and dean of Rockmont College in northern Colorado. They drove down to Pike National Forest in Colorado from Longmont in Boulder, Colorado, arriving on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. Once they arrived at the park, there was another 16 miles they had to drive, which was down a dirt road until they reached the destination known as Topaz Point. Native Americans believed that this location was haunted by evil spirits. Early settlers dubbed this place the Devil's Head, which is a startling coincidence considering his theological background. Unfortunately, in his old age, Maurice could barely walk and had very bad knees along with a blood disorder. He was considered severely disabled and required the help of his friend, David, to help him down a small hill to get to the sandy digging spots in the forest. After a while spent searching for Topaz, it was now noon and the men got back together to have lunch. Now, they decided to get back to work, but did so together for an hour. After this, they split up, and David went roughly 50 yards away to search another spot. Maurice spent most of the afternoon at this location, and at 3:25 PM, David came back to check on him and he was fine. They made small conversation, and David made Maurice aware that they were leaving in 15 minutes. David went back to his spot, tidied up his equipment and packed them away. 15 minutes had passed, and David returned to Maurice once more, except this time he was gone, along with the bag he was carrying, which contained all of his garden tools. There was no evidence of a struggle, no blood or disruption of the earth. He had just seemingly vanished. David, obviously baffled, had no idea where he could have gone. David noted that it would have been impossible for Maurice to climb up the hill on his own and couldn't have gotten far. Despite this, David went back to the car to check if Maurice had made it back by himself, but he wasn't there. David honked the horn, called for him, and searched for a long time, but he didn't get a response. Beginning to panic, he flagged down a nearby car and asked them to call the sheriff while he continued to search. At 7:30 PM, the first sheriff arrived named Deputy Allison, who searched the area, but similar to David, he could find no evidence of anything taking place. The sheriff then called search and rescue, and they came in force with canines and a search team. This started a 5-day search that Politis noted as being one of the most thorough searches in the area. The authorities involved said that they did everything they could and literally couldn't find any evidence that Maurice had even been in the area. Maurice's wife sent a letter to the governor of Colorado to reopen the case, but never received a reply. Whatever happened here was highly unusual, and an animal attack was ruled out by the search and rescue team. David was only 50 yards away and didn't hear any screaming, yelling, or cries for help. The question remains, where is Dr. Maurice Thomas, and how in the world could a man that could barely walk get out of the area? What happened here? His remains have never been found. Robert Springfield, 48 at the time of his disappearance, known as Bugsy by his friends and loved ones, by all accounts was a very good man. He took his 13-year-old son, Colton, alongside his adopted son, Brent, with him on an elk hunting trip in the Crow Indian Reservation. This spot is in the Bighorn Mountains in the southeast state of Montana. Robert and his family were members of the Crow Nation Indian Reservation, and they were hunting on ground owned by the tribe. On this day, Robert had come dressed appropriately and was wearing heavy winter clothing with his weapon of choice, which was the bow and arrow. The details of this next part are a little hazy, but it appears that the group split up during their hunt. It's unclear if the two brothers stayed together, but Robert was by himself. Before splitting up, they agreed to meet back up at a pre-allocated location. The brothers arrived on time and waited for their father, but as the darkness began to set in, they panicked and called the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office and members of the tribe. Hundreds of searchers began to pour in alongside highly trained search dog teams and thermal imaging equipped helicopters, but the search failed and Robert was not located. In fact, nothing was found, no body, bones, blood or equipment, leading searchers to believe that animal predation had not occurred in this case. Just over a year later, in October of 2005, Robert's remains were found by elk hunters. The BillingsGazette.com reported, apparently, a group was hunting in the area when one hunter heard a crow in a tree screaming like a woman. The man went towards the bird but then shifted direction. The family believes that the spirit of Springfield's mother, who died just before Thanksgiving 2004, may have helped guide the hunter, who found a vest and then the remains. Bizarrely, as the hunter approached the crow's location, he said that the scene was strange. There was a partial skull, a femur, an untouched wallet, a neatly rolled up men's belt next to the skull, and 2 boots. Robert's bow and arrow was never found. The sheriff's office initially felt that a tree must have fallen on Robert, but didn't really know how to explain these findings, and the evidence at the scene didn't support the initial hypothesis. It was at this point that they notified the FBI. Given the strange findings and FBI involvement, I thought that it was very interesting and wanted to do some further reading. At this point, I'd like to read a short extract from newmaven.io, who documented something very strange. The Coles are joined in the lawsuit by another Crow family that feels the FBI has failed them. Veronica Springfield's husband, Robert Springfield, 48, disappeared on September 19, 2004, on a bow hunting trip with his 13-year-old son, Colton, in the Bighorn Mountains, an area he grew up exploring. Searchers used a grid system to comb the area for any sign of Springfield, while a volunteer helicopter pilot used an infrared sensor but also came up with no results. At one point, more than 200 volunteers and about 24 trained dogs scoured a 5 square mile area. They came back during the spring and still found nothing. Springfield's remains were found by hunters in October 2005 in an area the family says was 50 yards from where they had camped during the search. They insist searchers had looked at the exact spot where the body was found. The family wonders if Springfield, an ex-Marine and Special Forces member, had met foul play and his body disposed of later. Veronica said, "If he was actually up there in that area, to put it bluntly, we would have smelled something. The animals would have been there, the birds would have been there." But what happened next is almost as upsetting as knowing he was gone. The FBI sent the remains to Quantico, Virginia for DNA testing and identification. It took 2 years for the FBI to return the body to the family so that they could bury the remains. And over those 2 years, the family alleges that the FBI never made contact with them. "We went to hell," Robert's sister Myra said. They hope that in defending the lawsuit, the federal government will at least have to answer for their actions. This is just absolutely bizarre. Robert was found 50 yards from where the family and the searchers were camped, which means that he was found in an area already searched, so where was he? The dogs couldn't find him, and the helicopters never picked up his signature. Again, this is another disappearance where the shoes were removed, but by whom, and for what reason? Where did Robert's bow go? The boys never heard anything to indicate that something was wrong, no shouting or gunshots or anything of that nature. Confusion by the sheriff's office ultimately led to FBI involvement, who took the body for testing over a period of 2 years, which seems like a very long time. Surely, they must also have felt that the circumstances behind the disappearance were very strange, but as far as I can tell, they remained silent. So what in the world happened to Robert Springfield? Shawn Richey, 20 years old at the time of disappearance, went missing in a remote patch of woodland after a Halloween night out with his friends. Shawn, alongside his friends, travelled in a van from the town of Fraserburgh, located in the northeast of Scotland, to a location near the small village to the south known as Strichan. Shawn was seen twice on the day of his disappearance, once by his mother before leaving the house and once more in a convenience shop in Fraserburgh where he was captured on CCTV in the afternoon. Specifically, the group had travelled to a remote farmhouse for a Halloween party. At some point during this party, something went terribly wrong. In an article by thedailyrecord.co.uk, Shawn's father had this to say: "Something happened that led them to run and split up into 2 groups. Each group thought that Shawn was with the other. It's unclear exactly what led the men to splitting up at the farmhouse, but it seems that they become spooked by something." Shawn's father continued, "I just find it bizarre that this group of 8 young lads split up and run, but there's no evidence to say that Shawn disappeared due to criminality." At some point during Shawn's time missing, the police received 2 phone calls, but they were not from Richey, as he had forgotten his phone at home. The first call requested help from the police, and the second call phoned in to cancel the request. It's unclear exactly what was taking place, but there seems to have been some amount of confusion. Shawn failed to return home the following day, but he wasn't reported as missing that day as it was thought that he was simply with a friend. But when he also failed to return home the day afterwards, he was reported missing by his family at 8:45 p.m. This would spark what was reported as one of the largest search efforts in Scotland's history. At the time, Inspector Alan Brown had this to say: "The last known sighting of Shawn was in the area between Strichan and the A98 Fraserburgh to Banff Road. Significant resources have been involved in the search for Shawn, with extensive searches in open areas, woodland and waterways in a bid to trace him, and during the course of the inquiry, items of clothing have been recovered. More than 200 specialist search officers and 27 dogs have been involved." Now, this is where things get bizarre. As Inspector Alan Brown mentioned, some clothing items were found in the rough Greenburn area. These included his shoes and his belt. Shawn's father had this to say: "Some of Shawn's clothing and belongings were discovered close to the farmhouse in a boggy area, but that was the last evidence of his movements that night. The police have conducted one of the largest searches in Scotland's history, but 1 year on, we are no closer to finding Shawn or to finding out the full events of that night." The police had ground-penetrating radar and they found stuff in the bogs, tiny little artifacts and loads of animal bones, but no trace of Shawn. Detective Chief Inspector Matt McKay, who was leading the inquiry into the disappearance, said that the police have not ruled out foul play, but that there was no evidence to indicate that it had taken place. He added, "All I would say is that we have left absolutely no stone unturned and that I will never ignore the prospects of criminality, but I have found no evidence to suggest that Shawn has been the victim of any crime. It is surprising in one respect that we haven't found Shawn, given the resources we have put into it. It would be difficult to see how someone could get beyond that area, but we haven't found him, so he could have gone beyond that." It's important to remember at this point that Shawn didn't have any shoes on and the terrain was rough, so I do find myself agreeing with Matt's initial skepticism in regards to Shawn travelling outside the search area on foot. Professor Dave Barclay, a forensic science lecturer, said that the police efforts in this case have surpassed those in a normal missing persons case. This could mean that the police understood that these findings were highly unusual and suspected something untoward. Almost 5 years later now, and Shawn has never been found. What happened that night, and why did Shawn remove his shoes and belt? If Shawn was still in that area, he should have been found. So where is he? What do you think happened here? Stephane Gibson went missing while hiking in the North York Moors National Park. He was last seen on Wednesday the 11th of November 2015 at 4 p.m. by the group he had been out hiking with. Despite being 73, Stephane was very fit for his age and went on regular hikes and knew the area well. On this particular day, the moors were hit with heavy fogs and Stephane had gotten separated from the group while walking along a footpath between the small village of Lastingham and the Chimney Bank. It's unclear exactly how Stephane managed to get separated from the other hikers, but the group did not report hearing anything that would indicate Stephane had gotten into any kind of trouble. Stephane was reported missing at 7 p.m. that evening when he did not return to his vehicle. The search for Stephane was massive and the initial search went on for 30 hours straight. Many mountain rescue teams were out looking for him, including teams from Scarborough, Rydale, Cleveland and Swaledale, but despite searching for a lengthy amount of time, Stephane was not located. The teams were joined by the thermal imaging equipped Coast Guard helicopter, and after failing to detect him, the Royal Air Force got involved and provided air support, which also failed to locate Stephane. This was a desperate search that provoked a simply unbelievable response, and it's very strange that Stephane managed to somehow evade all of the searchers and thermal imaging equipment. The Search and Rescue Dog Association also got involved from across the country, and it was simply astonishing that nobody could locate this man. On the 14th of November, 3 days after Stephane went missing, he was found east of Lastingham and south of the moors near the village of Cropton. It's unclear precisely where Stephane's body was found, but Cropton is not inside the national park but is to the south and surrounded by countryside with woodlands to the north. I do not know how long Stephane had been deceased and could not find any comments made in regards to a cause of death. After getting lost, why did Stephane not shout to allow the group to locate him? If Stephane was found near Cropton, why couldn't he make it back to the village? Could Stephane's body have been placed there after his passing? How did he manage to evade thermal imaging equipment, search dogs, and many search and rescue teams scouring the area for him for 3 days? Stephane's disappearance was highly unusual and doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, here's another. On the 13th of December 2015, the Scarborough News reported, the brother of an intelligent and adventurous Scarborough man who went missing after going hiking in the North York Moors said today his family was extremely anxious about his disappearance. 38-year-old Kieran Chapman was an avid hiker and his family believe that he set out for a long-day hiking trip starting at Harwood-Dale Forest, but he never returned. Kieran's car was found on December the 2nd and his mobile phone was found lying on the bonnet of the car. It is thought that he started his hike a few days before the discovery of his car, potentially on the 29th of November. The authorities initially believed that Kieran may have gone hiking on the moors, and his brother stated his disappearance is totally out of character and we are extremely anxious about his failure to contact his family. After an unsuccessful search by authorities, the Scarborough and Rydale Mountain Rescue Team were called in to assist with the search the following day. Not a single trace as to Kieran's whereabouts was found and the search was stood down 3 days later. Law enforcement began to suspect that Kieran may have set off with the intention of not coming back, though Kieran's brother swiftly disputed this and told the Yorkshire Post, "It was fairly obvious to us that the police suspected Kieran had done something to himself, despite our protest that, although a bit of a loner, he was level-headed, happy and about as far away from that as you might imagine." Nothing has ever been found to suggest that this was actually the case despite a police search of Kieran's property in Scarborough. Kieran is a keen hiker. We strongly believe that this was the reason he was in Harwood-Dale. We also believe that he would never leave his car unattended for more than one night. We believe that he embarked upon an all-day hike and something untoward, an accident, a heart attack etc. has happened to him and he is lying somewhere on the North York Moors severely incapacitated or after 13 days unattended, dead. Inspector Graham Hinman of North Yorkshire Police told the Yorkshire Post, "In the case of Kieran Chapman, police teams have conducted a number of searches within a radius surrounding Mr. Chapman's last known position, which is where his car was found in the area of Harwood-Dale. The searches have been extensive and police have been assisted by the Scarborough and Rydale Mountain Rescue Team, the Royal Air Force Mountain Rescue Team and the NPAS helicopter. Ground searches have been challenging despite difficult terrain, harsh weather conditions and reduced daylight hours. However, police and agencies have been relentless in their efforts to find Kieran. It seems to me that after Kieran's family complained, the police enhanced the search effort. Police dogs also got involved in the search, but they failed to pick up his scent. On the 21st of December, the Scarborough News added, the Ministry of Defence is even understood to have assisted. I have personally never heard of the Ministry of Defence being involved in any civilian missing persons case before. Did they suspect something? If this was the case, the press was never made aware and the extent of their involvement is largely unknown. Kieran's body was found 5 months later on May the 3rd, 2016 by a couple who were out walking their dog in a secluded area of Harwood-Dale. They first thought that their dog was sniffing a pile of clothing, but came to the realization that it was in fact a body. Kieran was in possession of a backpack and a digital camera with photos of himself on it. Forensic pathologist Peter Nigel Cooper stated that the body was in a state of decomposition and had no broken bones or damage to internal organs, and no evidence existed of natural disease. Mr. Cooper said that there was a low level of alcohol present, but said that it was most likely caused by the decomposition. There was an amphetamine drug present, but it was not at a high enough level to explain his death, and Mr. Cooper ruled out an overdose. Mr. Cooper added, "I do not have a definitive explanation, but there is a probability that he died from hypothermia." Afterwards, the coroner concluded that it was an accidental death. Kieran's disappearance was highly unusual and out of character, as mentioned by his brother. Why did Kieran leave his phone on the bonnet of his car? Thermal imaging equipped helicopters failed to pick him up, and police search dogs failed to pick up his scent. Why did the Ministry of Defence take an interest in this case? This incident has never been fully explained. The Bolivian Amazon, or specifically the Madidi National Park, according to nytimes.com, goes from lowland to mountaintop from 600 feet to almost 20,000 feet above sea level. It covers more than 7,000 square miles of wildly different habitats. It has cloud forests, lowland jungles, rivers, streams, wetlands. It even has glaciers. The locals state that this jungle can swallow you whole in a matter of seconds, and they say so for good reason. Rivers are vast and go through mountainous terrain with thick blankets of fog creeping throughout the jungle. Surprisingly, despite its vastness and low visibility, disappearances inside the national park's borders are fairly rare. There hadn't been a single recorded disappearance in the park for a long time until late February 2017. At 8:30 PM on this particular night, the Madidi Park Rangers received a radio transmission in which it was relayed to them that 25-year-old Maykul Acuna had disappeared under highly unusual circumstances and left no tracks behind. They were made aware that Maykul had been on a rainforest tour with the local agency Max Adventures, and that he was last seen sitting on the steps of his cabin at around 8:30 PM the night before. The park director, Marcos Uzquiano, said, "This is a really strange case for us. We're not sure what happened last night, but we need to find out." The rangers on scene made comparisons to a disappearance that took place in 1981, where a tourist by the name of Yossi Ginsberg was lied to and given deceitful information by a fellow traveller. This led Yossi to being stranded in the rainforest for 3 weeks. But this incident was different. After the individuals in the group were questioned, it was thought that this was not the case. The rangers were described as being quiet and looking very determined. They quickly set off and began to search the immediate area inside the rainforest, thinking that Maykul couldn't have gotten very far given the harsh terrain and he was wearing sandals. Fazer, a guide for Max Adventures, relayed some interesting details. Fazer said in regards to Maykul that he had returned to the camp acting noticeably excited. He was acting a little bit strange, his face just didn't look normal. Fazer was keeping tabs on Maykul and invited him and the other tourists to participate in a Pachama ceremony, which is an ancient tradition thanking the Mother Earth for giving them permission to enter the forest. Maykul refused the invitation and remained at his cabin. From the point that Fazer left with the other tourists, another guide had made the visit to Maykul within 5 minutes, but he had gone. Fazer and the other guides, equipped with flashlights, scoured the lodge and combed the immediate area inside the nearby forest to no avail. Fazer said that they were searching until 5 in the morning and was surprised that he couldn't be located. Fazer said, and I quote, "It's because he offended the Pachamama, he didn't want to participate in the ceremony." After doing a bit of further reading, it seems like the locals are very superstitious of the area, and they say that the rainforest is filled with mystical entities, both good and bad. Locals believe that to disrespect the Pachamama is to put yourself at risk from being driven mad by Duende, which they believe to be a spirit that lurks in the forest and has the ability to take and hide its victims. One of the guides, who had spent most of his life in the area, had this to say: "For myself and the rangers, this is our culture. We believe that the Duende is real, and we think that it's possible that Maykul was taken by him. If this incident wasn't already strange enough for you, let's get bizarre. Because they didn't know what to do, the guides called for two shamans by the names of Romulo and Tabushir and asked them to bring Maykul back. The pair arrived and brought various ingredients with them, including cigarettes, beers, wine bottles, cocoa leaves, sugar, candles, sparkling confetti and a large wooden cross. They said, and I quote, "We believe that Duende has been harnessing the energy of Mapujo, a powerful tree spirit, to hide Maykul. He's far away, in a place we can't reach, but by performing the necessary intricate ceremonies we may be able to bring him back." At this point, Maykul's family, including his father, stepmother and sister, had flown in from Chile. Under the guidance of the park rangers and other professionals, they joined the organised search efforts. The rangers thought it best to work section by section, coming multiple kilometres around the lodge by walking in sweeping horizontal lines. I may be wrong, but I get the feeling that some of the rangers didn't care much for what the shamans were doing, and the shamans didn't believe the rangers could be successful until the spirits were appeased. Nevertheless, despite the differences, the rangers searched for 10 hours a day in different sections of the rainforest, desperately trying to find Maykul as they knew time was of the essence. The shamans also stayed up until dawn every night, making offerings and performing their ceremonies in payment to the Pachamama. Interestingly, and perhaps even bizarrely, the rangers did concede that they were surprised that they couldn't find even the slightest sign of him, no tracks or any trace at all. They said it was like he was never there. The experienced trackers among the rangers said that they couldn't believe that they hadn't found a single shred of evidence, and one of them was quoted as saying, "In 20 years we've never experienced anything quite like this before. For those familiar with the channel, this next part may not come as much of a surprise anymore." 6 days after the initial disappearance and tireless searching by all involved, one of the rangers found one of Maykul's socks on the rainforest floor, seemingly abandoned. This gave the rangers a location to focus their search efforts, and a new plan was produced to zone in on the area, which they immediately began to thoroughly comb. The shamans said that this was a good sign and that the findings changed everything. They were of the opinion that the sock represented a way to reach out to Maykul's soul to bring him back. The shamans then spent the next 2 days and nights without sleep, performing their ceremonies and presenting offerings to the Pachamama. The following day, they said that their payments had been accepted and that the following days would see more signs of Maykul. The day after this would see the rangers taking a boat down the river, where they heard the guides shouting at them to come over. The rangers docked and the guides called out that they'd found Maykul. Surprisingly, while he was somewhat dehydrated and had a lot of bites, he had swollen ankles and he was otherwise okay. Maykul joked and said that he wanted a Coca-Cola. At this point, let's get bizarre again, why not? Maykul was brought back to camp where he told of what happened to him during his time missing. "I was trying so hard to find the river, but I just couldn't find it," he told the rescuers. He went on and said that he was only able to make it because he was following a group of monkeys that would drop him fruit and lead him to shelter and water. When asked why he went into the rainforest, this is what he had to say. "I was having strange, terrible thoughts about the rainforest and I just wanted to get out. I started running. I was wearing sandals and I said no, they would slow me down. I threw away the sandals, then the cell phone and my flashlight. And after so much running, I stopped under a tree and I started thinking, what had I done? What was I doing? And then when I wanted to get back, it wasn't possible." Maykul said that he isn't completely sure what happened to him that night or why he made the decisions he did. Obviously, the shamans on the other hand, alongside the locals, maintained that it was the Duende's doing. They said, the signs fit, his strange behaviour pattern, the maddening thoughts, that's what Duende does. Ultimately though, the circumstances leading up to and during Maykul's disappearance remain a mystery. What are your thoughts about this truly bizarre incident? I don't think I've ever come across an incident like this before. On a very hot 1st of August 2018, 27-year-old Sam Sayers made the trip to the mountain known as Vesper's Peak by herself. This is a peak along the Mountain Loop Highway region of the North Cascades of Washington State. It was on this mountain that Sam disappeared without a trace, and almost 10 months later now, her disappearance is still a complete mystery. The last concrete sign of Sam was her name scrawled onto the register at the trailhead just off the Mountain Loop Highway. Unfortunately, at a young age between her junior and senior years of high school, Sam developed alopecia, which is an autoimmune disease that results in hair loss. According to her mother, Lisa, Sam was a strong person and dealt with the loss of her hair very well. She said Sam tried to wear a wig in high school, but she hated it. She took her wig right off in front of everyone. She has really empowered a lot of people through that journey. Because of this condition, Sam had a distinctive look, and other hikers were able to place her on that mountain as her head was crowned with a star tattoo. Lisa said that for some reason she wasn't quite aware of, she felt nervous about Sam going on that particular hike. Sam was an avid hiker, and this was not her first time at the Vesper Mountain. She began her hike at 8 AM on the day of her disappearance. This was supposed to be a routine trip, and she was expected to be back home to her boyfriend, Kevin Dares, by 6 PM that evening. As reported on NBCnews.com, Kevin said, "The last text I sent her that morning was me saying, 'I know you don't need me to tell you this, but the terrain can be dangerous.' And she just replied, telling me that she knew and that she loved me." Unfortunately, Sam would never make it back home that night. Sam was seen once after she had ascended over 4,000 feet up switchbacks and across boulder fields before reaching the summit. One hiker recalled that she was eating a sandwich while talking with the other rock climbers who were ascending some of the more daring areas of the mountain. According to SeattleMet.com, the last few hundred feet of Vesper is more of a scramble route than it is a defined path. Once the proper trail peters out in the dirt, it's common for every hiker to pick their own way. One hiker remembers seeing Sam veer down towards the peak's southwest side around 3 PM. This was the wrong side of the mountain, he would later relate to the sheriff's office sergeant. This was the very last time that Sam would ever be seen. As mentioned earlier, Kevin was expecting to see Sam at around 6 PM that day, but as late evening fell, he still hadn't heard from her. Kevin began to panic, so he got in his car and drove from Belltown all the way to the trailhead, which took just over an hour and a half. During this drive, the light was fading quickly, so he made one stop to purchase a flashlight. Upon his arrival to the trailhead, he noted that the place was very dark at this point, but he could see that Sam's blue Ford Fiesta was still in the gravel parking lot. This was obviously not a good sign, and Kevin said that he grew very nervous. With his flashlight, he made his way up the trail at roughly 10 PM. Kevin essentially speed hiked the trail and made his way through the thick forestry and hopped across boulders sitting above the Stillaguamish River. This led into a box canyon surrounded by incredibly steep walls. At first, Kevin was confused and couldn't figure out where she could have gone, but eventually found that there was one other way out. It was a trail that runs through a boulder field which was very difficult to navigate. This was the last push to the Vesper, but at some point along this final stretch, Kevin tripped and broke his flashlight, which forced him to turn around and walk the 3.5 miles back to his car. Thereafter, he drove 20 miles to the Phillip Public Service Center, which was closed, but he used the payphone to contact the authorities. This would be the beginning of one of the largest and longest search efforts in the area's history. Over 8,000 hours were spent scouring the mountain for Sam. According to StrangeOutdoors.com, 70 searchers, 14 dog teams and helicopters searched the area to no avail. At one point, drone operators and the Sheriff's Marine Unit were involved. In addition, volunteer searchers from around the state spent thousands of hours leaving bags with notes saying, "Stay strong, we're looking for you, everyone is thinking of you." The bags included a poncho, socks, energy bars, a compass, a flashlight, fire sticks, and a lighter. The sheriff's office spoke with witnesses who saw Sam the day she went missing, but none saw her come back down the trail. The sheriff's office would later state that starting from the day following the disappearance, search operations had included 357 hours of air operations, 105 hours of drone operations, 82 hours for the Marine unit, 329 hours from the sheriff's office, and thousands of volunteer hours spent searching for Sam. Many were left feeling confused as to why they couldn't find a single trace of her. Sergeant John Adams led the search and rescue response. He said that when a person is reported missing, many times you'll receive a call from a loved one saying that the missing has returned home. He knew this one was different somehow, and he told Deputy Peter Tesk, "We better throw everything we've got at this one, at least for a couple of days." Sergeant Adams was on the scene at 1:30 AM following Sam's disappearance, and he advised Kevin not to go back alone. But he realised he couldn't stop him and loaded him up with a helmet, food and a headlamp. Volunteers arrived at 6 AM and were grouped into various teams. They took off along the trail and were joined by the Snowhawk helicopter fitted with thermal imaging technology, but they couldn't find a single trace of her. Over the next few days, the volunteers were joined by other search and rescue teams from surrounding areas. Trained dogs began looking for a scent, human trackers were trying to locate footprints, and the bodies of water were scoured. This was an extensive search, and volunteers were surprised that they could find no trace at all. Sam's mobile phone provider was contacted, and they said that her phone last pinged on that mountain, which made the searchers double down on their efforts. The official search lasted 22 days and no signs ever surfaced. A number of footsteps were found on the southeast side of the mountain and were said that they might have been Sam's, but ultimately they led nowhere and this wasn't helpful. During this time, the searchers scoured just about every place imaginable that a person could fall from, but again they found nothing. Kevin would not give up hope and the unofficial search began. This effort was led by an Eagle Scout named Bud Carr, and Kevin spent the entire autumn of 2018 on that mountain searching, but Sam was never found, and to this day it is unclear as to what happened. Many have said that this disappearance was highly unusual, especially since the search started very quickly, and somehow Sam managed to evade a large number of searchers, search dogs and thermal imaging equipment. What do you think? On the 7th of February 2018, 49-year-old firefighter Danny Philippidis was on a skiing trip to Whiteface Mountain, located at Lake Placid in the state of New York. Danny had been skiing for many years and was considered to be very experienced. This skiing trip was one Danny went on every year with his co-workers, and he knew the area well. On one particular day of the trip, the rest of the group finished up skiing at around 2:30 PM, but being very healthy and in good shape, he wanted to continue on for a couple more runs. However, Danny was never seen again. He never returned to his co-workers. After realising that Danny had been gone for too long, the group went to retrieve him, but there was no trace of him at all. Bizarrely, his skis, boots, passport, identification and car were all left behind, seemingly abandoned without a reason. The authorities were quickly made aware of the situation, and this would be the start of a massive search effort. Hundreds of people, including helicopter teams, drones, sniffer dogs and other professional searchers, joined the search and would scour the area for 6 days. Strangely, despite the scale of the search effort, no sign of Danny was ever found. The authorities involved went on to note that there was very heavy snow at the time of the disappearance, and that there was no way that he could have gotten very far, especially without his skis or boots. Also, if things weren't already strange enough, this was a particularly busy day on the mountain and many people were out and about skiing, yet no one seemed to remember seeing Danny at all that day. The authorities were left baffled. They assumed that Danny must have taken his skis and boots off and ventured out into the wilderness, though had no idea why he would have done so. Shortly after this conclusion, the search was called off and Danny's family back home were left to wonder what kind of fate had befallen Danny. Now, this is where things get bizarre. 6 days after the disappearance, Danny's wife received a call and she noted that the man on the other end sounded like her husband but was groggy and disorientated. During this phone call, she noticed it was Danny and repeatedly begged him to call 911 so they could find him. Strangely, this call was traced from coming over 2,500 miles away at the other side of the country in Sacramento, California. The authorities went to retrieve Danny and he was found at a rental car area of the Sacramento International Airport. The authorities went on to note, and I quote, "On our end, it left a lot of unanswered questions. It was apparent that there was a lot of issues going on with the gentleman. He was very disorientated and obviously in need of medical assistance." Needless to say, they were absolutely baffled and had no idea just how on earth he reached this location. Everyone thought that he must surely be dead. Initially, it was thought that Danny must have been kidnapped, but there was no evidence of this at all. He hadn't been robbed, wasn't injured, and was still wearing his ski clothes. While being questioned by the police, Danny noted that the only memory he had was being dropped off by what he thought was a big rig truck in Sacramento. This was followed by purchasing an iPhone to call his wife and then going for a haircut. Interestingly, he specifically mentioned that he felt compelled to accomplish these goals, which is somewhat strange. Bizarrely, he had no other memories of his entire ordeal over the previous 6 days. He couldn't remember what the truck looked like, who was driving, or even when he was picked up. In addition to these facts, to make things even stranger, no one at the ski resort ever saw a rig truck during their entire stay. It was noted that Danny was very cooperative when questioned by the police, who were just as confused as he was. He allowed the authorities to check his bank and mobile phone records as well as his medical records, but they didn't offer a single clue as to what happened. Upon being found by the police, he was also in possession of all of his belongings and had sustained no injuries, which suggested that no suspicious activity had taken place. Interestingly, despite receiving a medical examination and not actually having any injuries, Danny reported feeling as though he had sustained a severe head injury. He literally shouldn't have been experiencing any memory problems. Danny had no history at all of psychological problems and by all accounts was a very family-orientated person and was also a dedicated fireman. This incident baffled everyone, and New York State Police Major John Tibbetts Jr. said that the incident was a head-scratcher. This whole incident makes no sense at all and many questions remain unanswered. Why did Danny take his boots and skis off before the disappearance? How did he travel anywhere in such deep snow and without boots or skis? Why did no one else ever see this reported rig truck? Why couldn't he remember any of the time he spent missing? Who took Danny in the first place and what was the motive behind any of this? He wasn't robbed or injured. And finally, how in the world did he manage to travel 2,500 miles away from the location of the disappearance? It's just absolutely mind-blowing and I can't think of an easy explanation for this case. Please do leave a like if you found the video interesting, or a dislike if you didn't. Feel free to share your honest opinion, I'd like to hear your thoughts. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of you that have subscribed to the channel and who share these videos. I appreciate it a lot and I can't thank you enough. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support is crucial and it's massively appreciated, so thank you very much to those who have signed up. Anyway, do let me know what you thought of this one and you'll find all of the links in the description below. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope that you have a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.